Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, does Thrive Montgomery 2050 need to refocus? COVID-19 vaccine shifts to county employees and children. Will parent backlash over education produce a GOP victory in Virginia? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former council member and founder of SkillSmart, a technology startup working to build stronger communities, Mike Knapp. Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, and special guest commentator, Cary Lamari, who's with the group Responsible Growth for Montgomery County. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. For the past several years, the Montgomery County Council has been working on a program designed to update the county's master plan first adopted in the 1960s. Known as Thrive Montgomery 2050, the plan has a laudable goal of seeking to increase affordable and attainable housing in the county. With us today is Cary Lamari, who's been active in the county as a candidate and who is now with the group involved in Thrive Montgomery 2050. Cary, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about Thrive Montgomery 2050 and what it means to the county.
Not a problem. To understand Thrive Montgomery, Thrive 2050, you need to understand the original Wedges and Quarters Plan that was developed in 1963 and refined in 1993. The Wedges and Quarters Plan was developed to promote three life environments: an urban core, a suburban wedge, and an outer rural ring. It was a catalyst for the Ag Reserve while protecting the diverse, naturally affordable single-family lifestyles of our residential wedges. And it concentrated our high density in our urban core, our satellite cities like Rockville, Gaithersburg, Germantown, and Clarksburg along the 270 corridor. Thrive is a major departure from this concept. It extends the urban canopy to the entryway of our rural ring and increases our density within our suburban wedges. It potentially doubles the density of our county residents. It creates what they call compact 15-minute communities. In these communities, it also creates the mechanism for increased density zoning. However, it's vague with respect to things like the environment, environmental concerns like flooding and loss of tree canopy and increased CO2 emissions within our urban and suburban communities. Thrive initially had three chapters that had been removed. It helped explain the concerns that we speak of, some of these unintended consequences. It gave guidance on these areas, and these chapters were removed. They were the environment, the economy, and a chapter on equity. What the planning chair felt was by removing these elements and sprinkling, the ideas throughout the plan, that it would somehow be more understandable. I find it rather vague. What you need to understand, though, is on the heels of Thrive passing, which could be in a couple of weeks, we have a new ZTA, and it's called the Attainable Housing Initiative.
Well, let me just stop you there,
Sure.
Cary. When is the council supposed to vote on this?
Well, they don't really know yet. They're hoping to have it done by November, but they keep hitting roadblocks, and the process keeps pushing back.
And the last thing is ZTA means zoning.
Zoning text amendment.
Okay, and what are the specifics of the zoning text amendments, and how will they change?
Well, actually, it's interesting. It's changed. It was initially proposed by Jawando to be 1 mile around metro stations. Then Hucker and Reimer felt that, okay, let's jump on board, and then extend it down transportation corridors, bus corridors. Today, Casey Henderson has expanded it to the entire county in all the R40s, R60, and R90 and R200 zones. So, you know, it's pretty much the entire suburban community. And you'll
Well,
end up.
let me ask you
Sure.
a question involving how the public has been involved in this. I mean, much of this discussion has gone on during the COVID
That's exactly
period.
right.
And it seems that you know, as much as we love our Zoom conferences, the public really hasn't been attuned to what the council is doing. So how active has the public and the community been in responding to this?
Actually, it is just now learning that there is a Thrive Montgomery. Initially, the staff, it didn't have the rollout that the 1993 refinement had. What they ended up doing is interviewing people, and of that, they got 500 comments. The top comments were on transit, affordable housing, education, schools, parks, and walkability. They had 36 emails distributed on their 1,300 email subscriber list, and they had 925 paid ads. Many of these were on buses. You probably saw a sticker that had pictures of cars or stick cars, and they said, wouldn't it be nice not to have a rush hour? Thrive Montgomery. But what did that mean to the public? You know,
we were all looking at our cell phones. We didn't see those ads.
I know. It ended up only bringing 286 online participants to individual forums. They only had 85 people testify at the public hearing. This in a community of 1,050,000 people. So does that answer your question as far as engagement goes?
It does. Now, we've got a limited amount of time, and obviously these are some major changes that are being proposed. What's this proposal going to cost?
Oh wow, let me pull this up here, because that's the $1 million, that's the $80 billion question. Well, according to the OMB, they calculated approximately $8 billion in operating expenses during the course of the 30 years, $9 billion in capital projects. However, it didn't include many things, and they ended up negotiating with Casey Anderson. It didn't include $6.5 billion for bicycle network. That's $6.5 billion. It didn't include the compact communities, which 32 of them, and the smallest one, small community, was $827 million. So realistically, that's about $35 billion. It didn't include.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We only have a minute left in this very important topic. What are the next steps? Before
the county council's going to be having a hearing, going to be taking it up. They've already had their hearing. They're going to be taking it up and voting on it. So the public needs to send emails, letters, and phone calls. And then immediately on its heels, you're going to have the Attainable Housing Initiative. The public needs to get involved. It's that simple.
And tell us about your organization, how we can get in touch with your
Responsible Growth for Montgomery County. RG for MC is our website. On that, you can go to our Facebook page, Responsible Growth for Montgomery County. You can read all about Thrive. You can read all about how this has happened in every community around the country, or a lot of them.
Well, Cary, I want to thank you. I know it was a daunting task to talk about this comprehensive plan in just under 8 or 9 minutes, but I want to thank you for being here today with us.
My pleasure, sir.
Joining us now is our regular panel of Mark Uncapher and Mike Knapp. Mike, first question to you. That's pretty daunting stuff that we just heard from Mr. Lamari. And what has always concerned me when I've heard about Thrive Montgomery 2050 is just how comprehensive this is and how little input that the public has had as an opportunity, even though I understand, you know, lots of emails about public hearings that have been on Zoom, but I just don't feel like people focused on this because of other concerns during the COVID pandemic.
And your question is?
My question is, isn't this something that the council needs to slow down on and allow the public to catch up to where it is in the process?
Well, it's always a difficult piece with land use in Montgomery County anyway, because we've always been kind of divided on the growth versus no growth perspective. And so that always makes it challenging. And oftentimes that's a strategy, is just to slow it down, because then that at least appeases one part of the conversation. We really do need to update our comprehensive plan for the county. And it does set a framework. We're the only people in the only community in the entire region that is still operating off kind of the wedges and corridors plan, which unfortunately has lent itself to a lot of our transportation challenges, because all of our development was north-south and we have very little connectivity east-west as a result of that. And so as we look at this, we've got to come up with a way to begin to address those issues. We've got to come up with a way to look at how we increase our housing supply. The region as a whole has to figure out how to try and do this, and we've got to have a plan that thinks about how to do that better. And so I think we've got to get that on the table. The hard part is how to get people to pay attention to land use in general, because to your point, most people, their eyes glaze over. And I chaired the Planning, Housing and Economic Development Committee for 3 years, and it's hard to get people to show up to engage who just aren't against it. And so I think it's important for us to have the dialogue, but I also think it's important for us to move this forward, because I think our county is stagnating as a result of having an outdated and antiquated plan.
But let me get Mark in here, because Mark, there seems to be a lot of controversy over the density issue related to this portion of the plan. And so what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree. I mean, people are voting with their wallets across the country, and it is not towards higher density. It is towards lower density. One of the other flaws of this plan is its overdependence on public transportation. It does not really address the east-west corridor issue, which is a very significant one. It really doubles down on a strategy of being more dependent on public transportation. Again, that's another one of those areas where people are voting with their wallets, not to be as dependent, not just nationally, but here just in the Washington region. So I think that this is really an out-of-touch plan to the realities of sort of the housing and transportation marketplace that exists today. It's kind of a dream of experts to the way people ought to live, as opposed to what people's preferences actually are.
I think to your point early on, Casey, that if there's a reason to slow this down, it's because we've had 2.5 years where we're seeing a significant change in how people are operating. We were clearly moving into a direction where people wanted to be closer, wanted to use more transportation. They're now backing away. We need to figure out what that means and where we want to get to as a community.
Yeah, there has. I mean, there's been a sea change in how in all our lives, whether it's in the office sector, the residential sector. I mean, there were huge changes. No better example is the fact that Metro is running at 50% capacity now because of continued safety issues. So these are all concerns. But I also want to go on to topic for the last 2 years, which is about COVID vaccines and how it's going to impact Montgomery County employees and MCPS students. Very soon, federal regulators will announce that children as young as 5, in other words, kindergartners, will be eligible to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, Mike, up till now, only those who wanted to participate in sports teams were required to be vaccinated. Are we going to see an expansion of this program? And frankly, are parents going to accept that?
Well, I think we will see an expansion of the program, and we already have a vaccine program and requirements for students to be vaccinated before they go to school. And so I don't see that this is out of that norm. I think we obviously continue to need to see what the FDA is, what the clinical trials are telling us, what the studies are saying, and make sure that information is there and available. But I think if we're seeing the safety and the efficacy that we've seen so far, then yes, I think it makes sense for us to have that available for students and to make sure that students are vaccinated like they are for other diseases.
But the question arises, and Mark, I hope I'm not cutting you off on this, is that students are the least susceptible to COVID-19. So is it really necessary that they be vaccinated? And again, there are a lot of questions about the safety of the vaccine.
There are questions, although I'd point out one of the stranger statistics, and I can only describe it as strange, is from the CDC, is the indication that Montgomery County is 99.5% vaccinated, which I think is fairly fair. I'll go out on a limb that that's not really the case, which actually raises all sorts of questions about the statistics in general. But more to the point is the really good news about Montgomery County is that we're reaching a point now, an important threshold of essentially of less than 500 new cases per day. Is actually a statistic based on 100,000, but multiplying out by a million people, which takes us down to a point where the indications are we won't need to mask, and more to the point is we have fewer cases going forward. So this really may be that we're kind of continuing an old war when in fact, I hate to say, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We've actually kind of turned the corner on COVID.
Well, doesn't this also dovetail into the issue, the tug of war between the county executive and the council, or at least some council members over vaccination of county employees? Mike?
Well, I'm not sure they're necessarily, yes, obviously all vaccine issues seem to all kind of blur in together. I think the challenge that you're seeing in the county and in the county executive and the county council discussion is the challenge that you're seeing about having your public safety officers not be vaccinated and effectively trying to serve the public while not being vaccinated. And can we be in a position to mandate that? And really, the point is actually the distinction they're making is, does the council have the authority to do that, or does the county executive have the authority? And so, so people are saying are they vaccinating or not vaccinating, and they're trying to actually have a debate on who has the authority to say who can do what. And so it's really interesting because you've got a couple pieces running into each other. But I think it makes sense for your public safety officials to be vaccinated if they're going to be serving the public and not putting the public at risk.
Well, how do they put the public at risk, Mark? If someone is protected, how does an unprotected person cause a greater danger?
One of the underlying debate questions in all of this is, there's vaccination, and then there is potentially the immunity that comes from having been exposed to COVID and having developed a natural immunity on top of that. I think we're focusing way too much on vaccination and turning it into kind of a virtual signaling debate. And what we really need to be focusing on is the drop in cases that's taking place in under a variety of scenarios. But that's probably a conversation that we don't have enough time to talk about.
Well, I hope we don't get ahead of ourselves, and I hope we don't find ourselves in the same position we did a year ago, where when winter weather set in, we were all forced indoors and we saw an increase in the number of cases. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and pray that this is going to pass very soon. We have to go on. When we come back from this short break, all eyes are on Virginia's governor's election, but what does it mean to Maryland? Welcome back. It's hard to imagine that former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe is having difficulty in his effort to be reelected. By all accounts, McAuliffe left office as a fairly popular governor, but yet 2 weeks before the election, the eyes of the nation are focused on this race as a litmus test over parental involvement in public education. Mike, it's really phenomenal that one single issue over parent involvement, whether it be because of social issues or because of the teaching of critical race theory, has captured the public's interest in Virginia. And right now, as of today, Glenn Youngkin and Terry McAuliffe are neck and neck.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it is amazing. And I think it shows there are a variety of things I think at play in Virginia. One is I don't think that Terry McAuliffe has run a particularly effective campaign. And I don't think they've really paid attention to issues. I think there was an assumption that I was popular. I'll continue to be popular, and I'm riding the wave. And so I don't think they were really honing in a very, very solid message. And then I think, quite honestly, the other side has really tapped into this kind of rebellion theory of you can't tell us what to do. And if we don't want to hear it, we don't want to listen to it, then we should be able to tell you not to tell our kids that. And I'm intrigued by that because obviously there are things as you're learning in a school environment that are challenging, and we want people to learn to think critically. And I think if you only hear the things you want to hear, or you want your children to hear, we're not really doing our children a service in our educational space. But I think there are a lot of folks who feel that way right now. And so I think that Terry McAuliffe underestimated that. And I think as a result, he's running really fast to try and catch up.
Well, Mark, this is a growing movement, and this movement has been growing really for 2 years, ever since the pandemic hit, and parents had greater exposure to what was being taught in class. The volatility over teaching critical race theory hasn't, I don't think, crested yet. I mean, I think people are just waking up to the fact that almost every jurisdiction is teaching some form of it, whether they call it diversity, inclusion, and equity, or some form thereof, just like as we're doing here in Montgomery County. But this has the ability to become a national phenomena, doesn't it? And impact Maryland elections next year.
It will. I think one of the mistakes that the defenders of this curriculum make is kind of to try and parse language. There's been evidence, like we can point to examples of it in the Montgomery County public schools. It was uncovered as a result of essentially a freedom of information request. I think one of the most effective arguments on this really came from Condoleezza Rice on a show that I never listened to, but to the beauty of
You watch it every day.
Yes, yeah, it was on The View. And she really very articulated both the downsides of this, of really the harm that the theories can have on African-American children, and in damping down the aspirations that they can have. She talked about growing up in a segregated city, Birmingham, Alabama, and the way her parents were taught her to go forward. And I think it's a message that resonates with parents generally as an alternative to this critical race theory curriculum.
Well, the issue is, will it have legs and affect the Maryland election next year?
Well, it probably depends
Real quick, both of you. Mark, you've got 15 seconds, then Mike. I'm sorry.
No, I think race has affected much that's taken place in our country for the last 250 years. And I think that it's been underlying a lot for the last 2 years and will likely have an impact in the next election.
Well, we're gonna stay tuned assiduously as we watch the Virginia results in 2 weeks. I can't wait. Stay tuned now for Parting Shots. Welcome back. Now with Parting Shots, Mike Knapp.
Thank you, Casey. It just was announced earlier today, our Attorney General, Brian Frosch, indicated that he would not run for re-election. And I just think it's important for us to note and to shout out to Brian after 35 years of public service on behalf of both Montgomery County and the state of Maryland. He is a true public servant. I mean, he has served faithfully and honorably in both in the delegate and as a delegation member and also as Attorney General. And so I just wanted to thank him for his service and wish him well on his next pursuits. Thank
you, Mike. Mark Uncapher.
Sure, and he, of course, he represented District 16, and also representing District 16 is another statewide official, our state treasurer, an appointed position essentially, Nancy Kopp, who was a delegate from 16, but has for many years now been representing the state as treasurer in a very important role with the board that approves contracts along with the controller and the governor. So we thank her for her service as well over a very long time, about as long as Brian Frosch as well.
Well, that's very important to note. Those are two interesting individuals and public servants who devoted their lives to the betterment of all. I want to thank you both for those comments. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Cary Lamari for being here today. And of course, I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.